Hi, I'm Joel Bond, and these are my locked down life lessons brought to you from Greece. I'm gonna cut it to you straight. I don't want to make a video today. I'm tired. My patience is thin, my ideas feel scant, my motivation is waning. It feels like I came into this project with some momentum, as if I'd been riding a bicycle that just hit the uphill and I could go for a certain amount. But now, I've got to start pedaling. And it's frankly a certain amount of positivity that I just can't muster today. It's hard. Recently, I've been listening to a podcast called Serial, Serial. It came out a few years ago, and many of you have probably already heard it. If you've not, I highly recommend it. It's some of the most captivating news reporting that I've ever heard in my life. I'm currently on series 2, which tells the story of a US soldier named Bo Bergdahl, who was taken captive by the Taliban and held hostage for 5 years before he was released. There's a lot of controversy around the story, a lot of back and forth, but ultimately listening to this series has stirred up a couple of mixed feelings in me. First and least of all, really, is that of homesickness. Bo Bergdahl's descriptions of some of the villages and the landscapes that he went through in this experience have stirred up some common images. Not that Iraq has really anything to do with Afghanistan, but there is a shared cultural value and some religious roots that are shared as well, and some of the descriptions of the landscape feel quite familiar, and it's made me long for my home. But secondly, it's also brought up this idea of just what it feels like to be held hostage. Now, I recognize that this is a horribly unjust comparison because 5 weeks of quarantine is nothing like 5 years of being held hostage, being tortured, and having all sorts of horrible things done to you, and being deprived of much, much, much of your life. But really the big thing that I want to talk about here, the big comparison, is that of unpredictability, of shifting goalposts. The idea that the situation is fraught with all sorts of difficult situations. There's no roadmap for success. And that's kind of the same feeling. You know, we're in this stage where it's unpredictable. We don't know how long this will last. They say, oh, it'll be next week, and then that shifts and says, it's gonna be next month now. Or there's just no roadmap for it. Nobody knows how long this is gonna go and what it takes to get out of this. I think this shared common thread between Bo Bergdahl's story and that of quarantine really is just simply that of uncertainty. Everything else really is an unfair comparison. But in our current life where we so commodify time, we invest in our future, try to make sense of our past, this situation where we're forced to throw all that away and just be in the present moment, uncertain of what's going to happen next, well, that's a difficult mental space to be in for a long amount of time. That's not to say that life is haphazard, it's just that so many things of our life are really beyond our control. So it raises a big question for me. How did Bo Bergdahl survive for 5 years when I feel like I'm hitting a wall after just 5 weeks? Now, there's an unjust comparison really, so perhaps we should use a different model. So let's talk about cultural immersion. In the world of cross-cultural communication, people who live in different cultures, there's a model out there that talks about culture shock and how it sort of follows a sort of sine wave, if you will. That when you first enter into a new culture, there's a lot of excitement. There's the uphill slope of that thrill of trying to discover new things. But after a while, you kind of peak. All the newness and the novelty wears off, and you kind of create some habits. You have routines. You come to sort of understand the big picture of things. After a while, though, you tend to start hitting a dip below zero. You kind of drop below the line, and you hit some confusion or some anger. There's certain things you don't understand about your host culture or the language or where you're at, and you might feel depressed. And then that sine curve eventually, if you're good and really can press through, hits the uphill slope, and you come back into adaptation and new discoveries. This might be a better model, really, for understanding our quarantine, that of kind of culture shock, adaptation. And personally, I find myself at the bottom of that slope right now, thinking, how do I go up? How do I get back to being above zero? How do I get back to that positive side of looking at this? Because right now, I'm kind of sick of it. Well, the best advice that I've read about all of this situation, about culture shock and adaptation, is really to just dig your heels in and press on. How did Bo Bergdahl do it? Well, I think his case demonstrates that the human spirit is much stronger than we sometimes think, and that in the face of uncertainty, we really need to press in, and clarity will come. Perhaps not in our timeline, but it will come. So, in this space, whether it feels like a hostage situation, or whether it's a culture shock we're trying to deal with, or some odd mixture of those two, may you find a way out of the bottom of that slope and find the power and the hope to continue uphill to something positive once again. Take care. We'll see you next time.